Well, hi there, and thanks for joining us on The Next Right Thing. I'm Debbie Giorgiani with Adam Blai. We are the co-hosts of The Spirit World, heard right here on Guadalupe Radio Network on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. But on The Next Right Thing for Morning Joy, we always like to talk about current events and topics and articles that have come out, especially from Catholic publications, that we can really learn and grow from to get deeper in our faith and to understand people better. And Adam, there was one article from CNA, and you're gonna share with our listeners about this article and what Pope Francis had to say, and then we're going to speak personally about our feelings about this topic. Go right ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so this is a Catholic News Agency article that came out on February 15th, 2024, titled World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly, Highlights Loneliness and Throwaway Culture. So this is really beautiful and kind of important for Lent, because you'll see how this really touches on charitable acts during Lent. But Pope Francis is really calling us to kind of focus on the elderly, the grandparents, in terms of fighting against the kind of throwaway culture that we have developed in the westernized world. And certainly there's some of that in every culture, but this tendency of, people becoming a burden, the idea seeing them as a burden when they get older and they're no longer able to work, and, not visiting people. There's a very sad thing there. I think Pope Francis here in a beautiful way is drawing us back to being aware of those people that maybe we haven't seen very often, and sadly sometimes they don't enter our mind in the course of the day. And as we said, before we came on, Deb, how if they hadn't lived their lives and done the work that they did, we wouldn't be here. So, to kind of disregard them is going directly against God's commandments. And I wanted to share something. So when we look at Exodus 20, verse 12, and if we read that, we see that it's actually a commandment that includes a promise with it, which is really beautiful. So if we read the full reading there from the USCCB website where the Bible is available, it says, "Honor your father and your mother, that you may have long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you." So I think this beautifully points to two different aspects of that promise. One is just longevity, but also there's a reference to the land the Lord your God is giving you. Well, for us, that of course spoke to the Jews at the time in terms of the promised land, but for us, that also speaks to heaven, which is kind of the promised land for us. And so this is a reference to, this is one of the routes to heaven. This is a kind of a necessary part of making it to heaven, which is why it's one of the 10 Commandments. And so, this is beautiful that we can look forward to longevity in heaven with God and hopefully with the grandparents that we would honor today. So I think the Pope is pointing to, let's remember that we are neglecting a lot of people. There's a trend of neglecting and ignoring people. But he's also pointing to the commandments, and then beautifully, because it's Lent, here's a great example, Deb, of a way that we can actually do a charitable act, right? So we're supposed to fast, we're supposed to pray, and we're supposed to give alms or do charitable acts. Well, this is a great way to do an act of kindness. Go visit somebody, go visit somebody you haven't seen for a while. Give them a phone call.
Mm-hmm. So again, Catholic News Agency, a resource of EWTN, did a fine job with this article, and that's why we wanted to stay with current events and articles that are coming out on Morning Joy so we can explore them together. And the Holy Father calls for the theme for the fourth World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly, which will be celebrated on July 28th, has been chosen by Pope Francis. And so this is a perfect time for us to be discussing this and looking at our own lives on how we relate to the elderly. And I just, and you were referring to the fourth commandment, Adam, of honor your father and mother, right? And you were talking about how it is so important. And then you went into scripture talking about how when we do these things that are pleasing to God, it's not that we do them for a reason that we're going to get something back, a blessing back, but we do them for the right reasons. But God does honor those things, and he multiplies those blessings in many ways. And I just wanted to stress this with our listeners. Please, if you can look up this article, I think it is important. And the title is World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly Highlights Loneliness and Throwaway Culture. And Adam spoke about that. And it's important that we recognize that these human beings who have lived very long lives, who have worked in our communities, have served in our parishes, have helped to raise beautiful families, have stayed married. So many of the seniors, they have been married for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Okay? They are living out their sacrament of matrimony. They're beautiful individuals. And just because they may be aging, and just because they may have an age-related illness, doesn't mean that they're any less significant and any less, they should be valued tremendously by our younger generation. And I just think it's very, very important that we recognize that. Why do I say that, Adam? Because I'm speaking from experience. My mother was in an assisted living for 8 years. And I saw my mom every single day, sometimes twice a day. And I will tell you that the senior citizens, the elderly, they would hold on to my sleeve and they would say, please don't leave. You listen to us. You ask us questions about our life. You value the wisdom we can impart. We feel like, you're all of us. We can share that you're our daughter for all of us. And it broke my heart. Almost every time I left the assisted living place, Adam, I left in tears. Because I would say, wow, these beautiful individuals are craving and longing for their loved ones to visit or call them and just make them feel dignified and respected and honored and valued. And that they just want a little bit. They're not asking for a lot. And I'm not trying to judge anyone, because I know we all have busy lives. We all have busy lives. But I do know that there were beautiful seniors in these facilities that sometimes their families only visited once every couple months.
Or less.
Yeah. And so you talk about feeling lonely, folks. That's how you can feel, it's so horrible. So all I ask is that we think about this in a different way. Like Adam said, go deeper in Lent and really look at it differently. And if your grandparents or your parents have passed, then go to the cemetery if you can get there and clean off that gravesite and put fresh flowers and honor your parents and grandparents as the commandments tell us to do. I feel so strongly about it because I saw it firsthand, Adam, every single day. And I will tell you, it was cute. My mother, Connie, my late mother, Connie, would say to me all the time, I'm so glad that I have a daughter that sees me every day. And she would say that louder and louder each day. And I'm like, Mom, you need to not say that so loud because you're making everybody else feel bad. But she was so sweet. She kept trying to tell me, thank you for coming and visiting. And I just wanted to say that to our listeners because I think Pope Francis is really tapping into something that is very much overlooked in our society. What do you say, Adam?
Yeah, and there's another aspect in my work with canon law, which is another kind of facet of my life in the church. In that process, I study a lot of marriages, and I study the story of a lot of marriages. And I had some experience in this psychology and working with individuals, and this is more looking at family systems. And the beautiful thing, Deb, that I have seen in reading hundreds and hundreds of stories of relationships, the marriages from beginning to end, is when the parents of the people that are seeking an annulment for their marriage, when they were healthily married, when they were staying together, they persevered, they provided a good model of marriage to their kids. Those kids generally, almost always, are the ones that are trying to recreate that healthy marriage in their own lives and are trying to do the right thing instinctively because it's what they saw their parents do. And sadly, when the relationship was disjointed and led to conflict and all the possible bad things that can go on, the children of those situations unconsciously try to recreate that in their own marriage. and just the value in society of the family in terms of a healthy marriage leads to healthy children that seek out healthy marriages themselves. And, that's not to say that we give up on people that came from a rough childhood. Everybody had issues in their childhood. And we can heal those things through therapy and prayer if you had difficulty there. But the importance of the elderly in terms of being a model for us for a successful and healthy life in many different ways that we don't even realize is just huge. And we recreate our parents' relationships and styles of living unconsciously, whether we realize it or not. And so to thank them and to continue having a healthy relationship with them is, especially if they provided a good model for you when you were young, and if they struggled and they didn't provide a good model, to be charitable even more and to say, usually we realize later in life you did the best you could. And you were genuinely trying, and I know you weren't perfect, but we can let that go now, and we can say that we're sorry, and we can grow closer now. Like, there's just so much. There's not a wall between that generation and this generation. We are a continuation of that generation, is what I'm saying.
That's really good. There's so much I want to say on this topic. I'm so glad this article came out on CNA, and I hope our listeners read it and pass it around to their families. We're talking the next right thing. We're talking about the elderly, the seniors that we know and love. Maybe they are far away from us because we've moved away, because it's different now, Adam. Many times we hear the stories of in the olden days when people stayed close to the home base, and they didn't move far away, and they stayed in the town or the next town over. But now they're going cross country, international travel, all sorts of things, and the dynamics of the family has definitely changed. But it doesn't mean we have to throw everything out and throw everything away. We can honor and live by the commandments and the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, especially during Lent. It is very important for us to understand this better as Catholic Christians. So talk a little bit more about this CNA article about the elderly and how Pope Francis is asking us to really be mindful that there are a lot of people out there feeling very down and alone and forgotten, and that's not good.
Yeah, there's a quote in the article and coming out of the press office. So, press release related to what the Pope is calling for. So, quote, "By cherishing the charisms of grandparents and the elderly and the contribution they make to the life of the Church, the World Day seeks to support the efforts of every ecclesial community to forge bonds between the generations and to combat loneliness." So there's a couple words in there that jump out that we don't always think of, and that is the charism of grandparents. We do regularly think of the ministry and charisms of parenthood and the effect that parents have on their children and the graces that come with the gift of being a parent. But here we're thinking about the charisms of grandparents and the elderly. And I think of my own grandmother, my father's mother, who has passed. And when I was little, every now and then, she would take the time to pull me aside and say, "Here's some things that I've learned." And then one time we would have these little discussions when I was little. She took the time to handwrite a note and put it in a card. And it was like 7 things that I've learned in my life that she wrote to me that she had learned in her life. And they were not, it wasn't like simplified for a child. They were deep. And I still have that note.
Wow.
It's been, 40 years. It's fading. The ink is falling off of the paper, but I still have that note. And I'm still unpacking the wisdom of what was there. I still haven't processed it all. I don't have it with me to read to you, but it's in my things, and it's one of those few things that I've carried along with me.
You treasured it.
Yeah. And I had an instinct at the time that what she was passing on to me was based on not only, 70 years of life experience and living through part of the Depression, seeing the wars, her husband being at war, really having weathered some really difficult things. And I thought, this person's worth listening to. And because they loved me was the other reason. I felt an instinct that I should listen, that I
Right.
should take this seriously. So, you know, these charisms of grandparents to pass on wisdom, to pass on love in a different way than parents do. It's often more of an unconditional love, in terms of, punishment and discipline. And, grandparents are often a little more forgiving and a little more generous, right? And the parents have to do the job of being the disciplinarian usually.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different kind of loving. It's a different, beautiful gift. And the grandparents have a particular role in the family in
Right.
that way.
Well, a couple things. Your grandmother's first name, I'm curious?
Isabel.
Isabel. Beautiful. And so you talk about the wisdom that our grandparents and our parents can impart, and I totally agree with that. And I made a comment about age-related illnesses and diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's or something of that nature that can prohibit the kind of communication that we have on a regular basis with our parents and grandparents. It kind of stops it, right? Because it makes it quite difficult and actually quite frustrating, and it can be quite sad because this is the person that you knew before, and then things have changed, and you have to interact with them in a different way. The one thing I would share with our wonderful listeners of Morning Joy is that you guys are here because of your parents and grandparents, right? Everybody had to cooperate with God in order to get you here. And so with that, we owe them so very, very much. And to live under the commandments of honor your father and mother, and also the acts of mercy, it's our job just to be present. People want to talk, people want to listen, people want to interact. We are made for community. And maybe the conversation isn't that I don't know, deep or even interesting when you're dealing sometimes with the elderly that are getting, ready to not really be part of this world anymore. I understand that, but you know what? It's still a beautiful thing, and God is present, and where two or more are gathered, God is present, and you just really want to remember that when you enter in. It's soul to soul. Don't think about what can I get from this visit to my grandparents or my parents. Talk about what you can give, and that is your presence. And that presence means so much to God because you're honoring what God has instructed. And you always talk about it, Adam, that God is, very legalistic in with authority and how we are to behave and how we are to be obedient. And so I just would believe, right, if we make ourselves present, even if it's not the most interesting time that we can spend at in certain periods of time, but wouldn't you say that God is honoring and blessing that?
Mm-hmm. And, in a particular way, when somebody is getting closer to dying and going to their judgment, I think that is a really important time to try to be present and to try to pray with somebody. For myself, just some of the most beautiful moments of prayer that God has allowed me to be present for is when somebody is getting ready to die. I had a good priest friend who was in the nursing home, and I got to sit with him the day before he actually died, and he couldn't speak anymore, but he could look and he could kind of nod or blink in response. And that prayer time, I'll never forget it. I read some of the Catholic, there's a book of Christian prayers for the dead or for the dying, and there's a bunch of scriptures in there, and just holding his hand and praying and reading these prayers and citing these scriptures. And I'll tell you really briefly, because I know we're running out of time, but he gave something back. There was a time that he was talking with his brother, and I was sitting off to the side, and, I had been praying for a while, and now I was just sitting and they were talking. And he closed his eyes, and I know it may sound strange to some people, but I felt him blessing me.
Aww.
I felt him praying for me.
Mm-hmm.
Having come to visit him and be with him and pray for him, and gives me chills talking about it. It's like I'm right back
Right
there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, God blesses it both ways. You're going to be blessed for giving this time.
Yeah, it's a deep soul-to-soul connection. So we believe the next right thing is maybe pick up that phone, make that beautiful call to your grandparents, or make that visit, or send them a card, something of that nature, or pray for them. Okay, that's what we would say is the next right thing, right, Adam?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So with that, we'll send it back to Keith for the rest of Morning Joy.